Imagine a country so
People,
desperately
that's
poor.
Switzerland.
Its citizens had to eat grass, moss, and tree bark just to survive the winter. Today, it's a hyper-luxury global paradise where the average person is richer than almost anywhere else on Earth. How did a nation with zero oil, zero gold, and zero natural resources become the undisputed financial capital of the planet? When people look at Switzerland today, they see an absolute paradise on Earth. They see a picture-perfect postcard of pristine lakes, snow-capped alpine peaks, hyper-efficient trains, and unmatched luxury living. It looks like a land blessed by the gods. But popular history has a collective amnesia. It completely forgets that for centuries, Switzerland was considered a cursed nation and a guaranteed economic failure. If you study almost any wealthy country that grew rich over the last few centuries, you will find that they usually hit the geographic lottery. They possess some form of tangible, physical wealth that turned them into a trading powerhouse. Great Britain had massive coal reserves to power the Industrial Revolution. America and Russia were blessed with practically everything from endless oil fields to vast deposits of gas and gold. Even barren deserts turned into global hubs overnight the moment drillers struck oil. But if you look at Switzerland on a map, they practically had nothing. No coal, no oil, no gold, no iron ore, and not a single ounce of natural underground wealth. Worse yet, they were utterly crushed by their own hostile geography. The nation suffered from complete landlocked isolation, jammed right in the middle of Europe with absolutely zero access to the sea, meaning they had no ports and no oceanic trade routes. On top of that, 75% of their entire landmass was comprised of rugged, brutal, freezing mountains. This terrain created a logistical nightmare. It made it incredibly difficult to connect towns together, but more importantly, it caused a severe agricultural crisis. The freezing alpine conditions and rocky soil meant it was nearly impossible to grow enough crops to feed their own people. By the early 1800s, the poverty was staggering. The country was so destitute that Swiss families couldn't even afford to feed their children, forcing young boys and girls to walk across the border into Germany just to work as grueling manual laborers. The breaking point came in the year 1816, known historically as the year without a summer. The weather was so unforgiving and starvation became so brutal that desperate, starving citizens resorted to eating wild grass, moss, and tree bark just to keep their hearts beating. To the rest of the world, Switzerland was a hopeless, frozen rock. Yet, over the next 200 years, this exact same nation executed an economic turnaround so radical, so calculated, and so brilliant that it completely rewrote the rules of global economics. The turning point of the Swiss Empire began in the 1850s, and it is credited heavily to the vision of one extraordinary man, a thoughtful politician and brilliant businessman named Alfred Escher. Escher looked across Europe and America and spotted a terrifying reality for his homeland. He saw that the fastest-growing nations on Earth were accelerating at breakneck speed due to a single, game-changing invention: the steam railway. Railways were a logistical miracle. They instantly dropped the cost of overland transportation by a staggering 95%. Suddenly, a farmer who previously could only sell his produce within a few kilometers could use the tracks to ship his goods 1,000 kilometers away. Across the Atlantic, this exact infrastructure was giving birth to modern corporate titans. A pharmacist in Atlanta used the rails to distribute a unique syrup that we know today as Coca-Cola. In Pittsburgh, an ambitious entrepreneur began bottling horseradish and ketchup, using the expanding rail network to sell his condiments across the entire continent, building a mega brand today known as Kraft Heinz. Every major empire from Britain to France to Germany was aggressively laying down iron tracks to secure their economic futures. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, the economy was so primitive that people were still pushing wooden carts up dirt hills. Escher knew that if Switzerland didn't act immediately, they would be bypassed by history and left in permanent poverty. So, in 1852, he successfully championed a comprehensive railway act to bring the iron horse to Swiss soil. But passing a law is the easy part. Chuckled undertone. Brief pause. Actually executing it seemed impossible because Escher faced three massive roadblocks: Switzerland had no coal to run locomotives, no iron to forge tracks, and a landscape that was 60% sheer cliffs and mountain ranges. It was the engineering equivalent of trying to connect the highest peaks of the Himalayas with zero money in the bank. To build a railway network through mountains, you need two things: massive amounts of capital and world-class engineering talent. Switzerland had neither. But Alfred Escher was a master strategist, and he pulled off a flawless two-part plan to solve both crises. First, Escher realized that relying on foreign banks would compromise Switzerland's independence. So, he decided to create his own financial engine. In 1856, he founded a brand new financial institution which the world would eventually come to know as Credit Suisse. To raise the money required for the tracks, he didn't beg elite institutions. Instead, he rolled out 3 million shares of the bank directly to the public, offering a highly lucrative, secure investment scheme. The public response was unprecedented. The share offering was so insanely attractive that it was oversubscribed by a mind-blowing 73 times. Virtually overnight, Escher bypassed foreign dependency and secured a massive fortune of domestic capital ready to fund the nation's infrastructure. However, money alone cannot design a suspension bridge, it cannot calculate the physics of a cliffside track, and it cannot drill a tunnel through solid granite. At the time, Switzerland didn't possess a single world-class engineering college. But then, history threw Switzerland a golden opportunity. In 1848, violent revolutions erupted across Europe. Citizens in France, the German states, Austria, and Italy rose up in waves, demanding constitutions, free speech, and an end to absolute monarchies. As neighboring regimes cracked down with brutal military force, censorship, and mass arrests, Switzerland did the exact opposite. They quietly drafted a brand new constitution that guaranteed absolute free speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of assembly. Almost overnight, Switzerland transformed into the safest, most progressive haven on the European continent. The effect was immediate and electric. The most brilliant, talented minds, scientists, and creatives across Europe fled their home countries to escape persecution and headed straight for Swiss soil. Richard Wagner showed up in Zurich with an active arrest warrant on his head and ended up writing the historic operas that reshaped Western music. Political radicals like Vladimir Lenin sat in Swiss libraries plotting historical movements. Swiss universities became so progressively open that they graduated the very first female doctor in Europe. More importantly, the top engineering and physics professors from Germany and France fled across the border. Switzerland welcomed them with open arms, and this concentrated brain trust established the Federal Polytechnic in Zurich, the premier university that would later educate and produce Albert Einstein. Punch this realization line: Switzerland didn't have to spend a fortune to train elite talent. They simply rescued them during a global crisis. With unlimited domestic capital from Credit Suisse and the greatest engineering minds in Europe now holding Swiss passports, Escher unleashed an infrastructure revolution. They built the densest, most complex railway network on the face of the earth, threading over 5,000 kilometers of track through impossible vertical valleys, over roaring gorges, and into remote alpine villages. But the ultimate test was still standing directly in their way: the majestic, brutal wall of the Alps. This was a solid rock barrier standing 3 kilometers high, jammed directly between Germany, the industrial manufacturing monster of Northern Europe, and Italy, which was the gateway to the Mediterranean shipping routes. For over 600 years, the Alps were a geographic curse. The only way to move goods between Northern and Southern Europe was the treacherous Gotthard Pass. Merchants had to drag heavy cargo to the freezing summits using pack mules, crossing treacherous ice pathways. The journey took 3 grueling days, and the pass was completely blocked by snow for 7 months of the year. Alfred Escher decided to do something crazy. He proposed driving a train tunnel straight through the dark, solid heart of the Alps. He used his diplomatic and business acumen to convince both Germany and Italy to help co-fund the project, proving to them that a subterranean shortcut would benefit everyone. It was a brutal, heroic 10-year drilling campaign, but when the smoke cleared, the impossible was achieved. The historic journey from Zurich to Milan collapsed from a treacherous 3 days to just 8 hours, while the cost of transporting freight plummeted by over 80%. By physically conquering the Alps, landlocked Switzerland achieved the ultimate geopolitical judo move. They turned their greatest geographic weakness into their ultimate economic strength. They made themselves completely indispensable, becoming the primary, high-speed transit hub for continental Europe, anchoring a trade route that today services an area contributing 16% of the European Union's entire GDP, with a world-class railway infrastructure binding the nation together and connecting it to the core of Europe. Switzerland entered its second, and perhaps most brilliant phase of hypergrowth. This is where the Swiss corporate and political elite utilized incredibly clever, low-cost policy strategies to manufacture wealth out of thin air. They realized that since they couldn't mine physical wealth from the ground, they would sell conceptual value. They sold financial security they didn't have to fight for, life-saving medicines they didn't originally invent, and gourmet chocolates made from ingredients they could never naturally grow. To understand how Switzerland became the banking capital of the world, you have to understand the commodity of fear. Whenever there is major global conflict, economic instability, or political chaos, wealthy individuals and businesses look for one specific thing: absolute safety and radical privacy to shield their assets from aggressive tax collectors, invading armies, and unstable governments. Switzerland recognized this psychological demand perfectly. In 1934, as political extremism, fascism, and the dark clouds of World War II began brewing across Europe, the Swiss government passed a revolutionary banking law. This act made it a severe criminal offense, punishable by immediate imprisonment, for any Swiss banker to ever reveal the identity or the contents of a Swiss account holder. Firm and clear, absolute secrecy became a legally enforced product. By the time World War II fully erupted in 1941, the Swiss franc was practically the only freely convertible, stable, and universally trusted currency left anywhere in Europe. The German Reichsmark had become virtually worthless for international trade. When the Nazi regime needed to purchase critical war materials from international suppliers, no one would accept their paper currency. They desperately needed Swiss francs. To acquire them, the Nazi Party shipped tons of plundered gold directly to Switzerland in exchange for the stable Swiss currency. Historical records show that the Swiss central banking system accepted roughly 1.2 billion francs of Nazi gold, equivalent to over $2.5 billion in today's money. By positioning themselves as a hyper-private, completely neutral financial vault, Switzerland became the indispensable banker to the world during its darkest hours, cementing an influx of global capital that laid the foundation for modern global wealth management. Today, Switzerland is celebrated as a dominant titan in the global pharmaceutical industry, exporting advanced life-saving chemicals and medical drugs worth over $169 billion every single year, housing corporate giants like Roche. The irony of Swiss global dominance doesn't stop with finance and pharmaceuticals. It extends directly to your grocery aisle and luxury boutiques. Consider Swiss chocolate, universally recognized as the absolute gold standard of culinary luxury. The biological reality is that cocoa trees require a hot, tropical, equatorial climate to survive, meaning a cocoa bean cannot grow anywhere near the freezing Swiss Alps. Yet, Switzerland dominates the high-end chocolate market through pure process innovation. In 1875, a Swiss inventor named Daniel Peter cracked a food science dilemma that had defeated confectionery chefs for decades. He figured out how to successfully dehydrate and mix condensed milk with bitter cocoa paste, creating smooth, stable milk chocolate. He became a founding member of a small enterprise we now know as Nestlé. Shortly after, another Swiss innovator named Rodolphe Lindt invented a mechanical process called conching. By utilizing a custom-designed heavy roller to endlessly agitate and aerate liquid chocolate for days, he transformed a gritty, bitter, unpalatable mess into a silky, uniform texture that literally melted on the human tongue. This breakthrough launched the iconic Lindt empire, which today generates billions in revenue annually. They applied this exact same hyper-precision, value-added mindset to raw metals. Switzerland didn't possess vast iron or copper mines, but they imported basic raw brass and steel, handing them over to highly disciplined artisans. Swiss watchmakers took worthless fractions of metal and machined them into incredibly complex, microscopic mechanical gears, escapements, and springs, creating timepieces of unmatched accuracy. They turned the humble wristwatch into the ultimate status symbol, essentially creating the luxury iPhones of the 1900s. In a highly commoditized global market, they didn't compete on volume. They manufactured an aura of ultimate Swiss perfection, precision, and prestige, allowing them to sell a tiny mechanical device for more than the price of a motor vehicle. The miraculous transformation of Switzerland offers a profound lesson in economic history. Switzerland did not escape the crushing weight of poverty because they got lucky, hit an oil well, or discovered a mountain of gold. They escaped because a single, determined generation looked at a bleak, resource-starved, and cursed landscape and decided to play a flawless, highly strategic, 200-year game. They refused to let geographic boundaries define their destiny. Instead, they designed open political policies to capture the world's most elite displaced talent, engineered world-class infrastructure directly through solid rock where the rest of the world said it was impossible, and leveraged agile legislative loopholes to outsmart global industrial competitors. Switzerland proved to the world once and for all that a nation's greatest economic resource is never what lies deep beneath its soil. It is how beautifully, precisely, and strategically it unlocks the power of human ingenuity.